In 1969, a military coup in Libya overthrew a pro-US monarchy and established a dictatorial regime with Muammar Gaddafi at its helm. The coup's aim was to eradicate US military presence in Libya. Aided by oil wealth, Gaddafi sponsored various terrorist groups in an effort to undermine the interests of the US. These actions would precipitate conflicts between the two countries for almost 20 years, and eventually lead to the bombing of Pan Am Flight 103. In the aftermath of the bombing, and after decades of isolation, the Libyan government offered to extradite the perpetrators and embarked on new political strategies. Gaddafi also abandoned the Libyan weapons program and engaged in negotiations with the West. Following the September 11th attacks, the Bush administration lifted sanctions in an effort to re-evaluate the US-Libya relationship. This reconciliation led to Libya being a crucial ally to the US in the War on Terror. When Gaddafi seized power, Libya supported Arab nationalism and the Palestinian cause against Israel. Gaddafi also sponsored a wide array of insurgent communist and terrorist organizations. At the time, Libya was also suspected of attempts to assassinate leaders in Egypt, Chad, Saudi Arabia, Sudan, and Tunisia. This global rampage of terrorism extended to the US and its allies. Over the next 3 decades, numerous airliners would be brought down and hundreds of lives lost in terrorist attacks around the globe. Following the inauguration of President Ronald Reagan in 1981, intelligence suggested that Libya had commenced the development of nuclear weapons. Gaddafi's alignment to the Soviet cause had also alarmed the US. In 1985, terrorist attacks in airports in Rome and Vienna killed 19 and injured 229 others. Gaddafi praised these attacks as heroic. In March of 1986, the US engaged in a naval confrontation with Libya in the Mediterranean Sea. This resulted in the death of 35 Libyan sailors and the sinking of 2 Libyan patrol boats.
On April 5th, in West Berlin, a terrorist bomb exploded in a nightclub frequented by American servicemen. Sergeant Kenneth Ford and a young Turkish woman were killed, and 230 others were wounded, among them some 50 American military personnel. 7 o'clock this evening, Eastern Time, air and naval forces of the United States launched a series of strikes against the headquarters, terrorist facilities, and military assets that support Muammar Gaddafi's subversive activities.
Following a warning from the Prime Minister of Italy, Gaddafi was able to escape unscathed, but much of the country was devastated. Over 60 Libyan citizens died, and dozens were injured, including 2 of Gaddafi's sons. The attack resulted in the downing of a US Air Force F-111 fighter and the death of 2 Air Force captains. It is also speculated that Gaddafi's adopted daughter, Hannah, was killed during the bombing. On the 6th of December 1988, the head of security for Libyan Arab Airlines and Libyan intelligence officer Abdel Basset al-Megrahi boarded Air Malta Flight 231 from Tripoli to Malta. This was the first leg in a tragic chain of events that leads to the murder of 270. On the 7th of December, he purchased some clothing and a Toshiba cassette recorder. On the 21st of December 1988, Megrahi travels to Frankfurt on Air Malta Flight 180. He then boards Pan Am 103A to London en route to New York. In London, passengers begin boarding Pan Am Flight 103 to New York, but this 36-year-old Libyan national did not board this flight, though his luggage did. The flight took off at 6:25 p.m. with 243 passengers and 16 crew members. 32 minutes after takeoff, the plane is flying over the Scottish town of Lockerbie. Within moments, this quaint town becomes the scene of Britain's worst air crash.
Rescue teams from all over Britain are heading for the scene of what looks to be Britain's worst air crash tonight.
This is the little border town of Lockerbie tonight. The air is thick with smoke, flames and the smell of aviation fuel. A crater 20 feet deep marks the spot near the main Glasgow road where the jumbo jet came down.
As dawn breaks on a cold winter morning, it is clear that no one has survived the crash. All 259 passengers and crew are dead, along with 11 residents of Lockerbie. It soon becomes apparent that a bomb had brought down the plane. A detailed investigation reveals that the bomb was concealed in a recorder placed inside Megrahi's suitcase. The trail of evidence leads an investigative team to Switzerland and a company called Mebo. Mebo Telecommunications Incorporated allegedly manufactured and sold 20 long delay timers to the Gaddafi regime.
This is a long delay timer that brought down that aircraft.
After an extensive investigation, U.S. and Scottish officials indicted Libyans Abdel Basset al-Megrahi and Lamin Khalifa Fimma. However, the Libyan government refused to extradite the suspects. This refusal caused the UN to take action by approving Resolution 748, which stated that all member states restrict the overflight of Libyan aircraft and prohibit the supply of all weapons and ammunition to Libya. It also passed Resolution 883, which ordered a freeze on all Libyan-owned financial resources and international assets. This caused Libya to become isolated for decades and face major economic downfall. In the late 1980s, Libya's economy was on a significant decline following a major collapse in oil prices. Libya's oil revenue dropped from $21 billion to $5.4 billion, dramatically weakening their financial status. The UN sanctions had isolated Libya, and it was able to endure these conditions for 7 years, but eventually led Gaddafi to comply with the demands of the UN.
The Libyan Chargé delivered a letter which set out very clearly their view, now shared by the British and the American governments, that Libya has met the conditions set out by the Security Council for the lifting of sanctions.
On Gaddafi's request for a fair trial, the UN compromised and held the trial in the Netherlands under Scottish law in 1999. Al-Megrahi was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison on 270 counts of murder, conspiracy to murder, and violating Britain's 1982 Aviation Security Act, while Fimma was found innocent. Following this compromise, the UN lifted its sanctions against Libya. This allowed them to trade with nations, gradually improving their economy. Libya also publicly accepted responsibility for the attack over Lockerbie and renounced covert nuclear and chemical weapons programs. On a warm summer morning in September 2001, the world witnessed the worst terrorist attack on civilians when 19 men under the direct order of Al-Qaeda hijacked and flew 4 American passenger jets into the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. Many Muslim nations did not support Al-Qaeda in this barbaric act. This included Muammar Gaddafi, who strongly condemned these attacks and offered his condolences to the US. Gaddafi offered to assist the US in the war on terror and agreed to dismantle Libyan nuclear and chemical weapons programs.
Its government, in response to the United Nations Security Council's Lockerbie demands, has already renounced all acts of terrorism.
The President signed an executive order that terminates the national emergency declared in 1986, remaining economic restrictions on aviation services with Libya, and third, unblocks approximately $1.3 billion in assets frozen under the Libya sanctions program.
Today, there is little reminder on the horror that struck Lockerbie 30 years ago, but the compromises that followed still stand strong. The Pan Am tragedy has ended decades of conflict and installed long-lasting compromises. It has had a major impact in the security aspect of the airline industry. Improved aviation security procedures such as multi-level baggage screening systems were introduced at airports worldwide and are still being used today. Flight 103's fuselage still stands at the AAIB headquarters in Farnborough, England, and is being used to train investigators from around the globe in case terrorists strike again. In a church outside the town of Lockerbie, a memorial stands in remembrance of the 270 people who sacrificed their lives to end a global rampage of terrorism. The bombing of Pan Am Flight 103 is testimony to the fact that our pursuit to end state-sponsored terrorism must be perpetual if we are to achieve peace. We must use both political and military resources in order to identify irregular and unconventional threats to withstand the dangers posed by terrorist organizations around the globe.